Hello, everybody. I am showing 2 o'clock, so let's get started so that we can get out of here at 4 o'clock on our Friday afternoon. Welcome. Hello. For those of you who are new today, my name is Whitney Turner. I'm faculty member at the Johnson County Community College's Math Department. In addition, I also serve as the co-chair of the Kansas Math Pathways Task Force, which every time I say it, it's a full mouthful. As many of you know, we're working across the state of Kansas to implement math pathways, co-requisite support, and statewide course placement measures. This is actually the last of our professional development series, and we have two really great speakers who we are lucky to have. Our first is Brandon Protis from Complete College America, and he is going to speak with us about assessing math pathways program. So welcome, Brandon. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself and take it away.
Great. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. And I'm happy to see the work that Kansas is doing around co-requisite support, DevEd reform, and the math pathways. I see Connie Richardson is on from the Dana Center, so I know you're doing great work all across the board. My name is Brandon Protis, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President of Alliance Engagement at Complete College America. And Whitney, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, just to be sure? Awesome. And I'm going to be working with you today, focusing on assessing co-requisite support. There's so much that I can discuss around co-requisite support in terms of the research, the case making, the implementation, but this session is really going to focus on assessment. To get started, I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what co-requisite support is. And when I've done presentations in the past on co-reqs, I've taken this for granted and realized at the end that not everyone has the same idea. So what I am talking about when I talk around co-requisite support is a specific type of DevEd reform. And what you see on the left is the traditional prerequisite remediation model. And it's where students who are assessed not being at the college level by the college, it's not the student typically who assesses themselves, it's typically the college who makes that determination, are told that you take a class to prepare yourself for that. And if you're below that level, a class before that. The image on the left shows 3 classes of prerequisite remediation before the college level gateway class. And that can be any of the math pathways courses, college algebra, tract, stats, track, math for liberal arts. Students, and we've talked to colleges that have 4, 5, or 6 courses before. So this image just shows 3, but it's essentially a student comes to college, they think they're taking a college course, and they might be taking a year, year and a half, 2 years or more of courses that don't count for credit towards their degree before they even have access to the college course. As opposed to that, co-requisite is where all students go into the college level gateway course. That is the default, all students. The default is not co-req. The default is you either go into the college level course on its own, or if you're required or recommended, or maybe you're neither, but you choose to opt in because as you scale co-requisites, you actually think you could do better with that support. You may opt into it. You would take that college level course with a co-req during the same semester. I'm not going to go into in full detail here because this is about assessment, but it is a different kind of pedagogy. But some of the key points are we're removing those points of attrition because in the left model of prerequisite remediation, it takes a significant amount of time to get through, whereas in co-requisite support, everyone has access to that college level course in their very first semester. And the focus on the reason why is we want to save students time. We want to save students money that they're paying for courses that don't count. And we want to increase the success of students who are getting through that gateway course. And that's important framing, and you're going to see how it comes about through our assessment. Last thing I'll say is when CCA talks about, and Kansas is doing this through policy, we talk about going to scale, which is removing or eliminating all prerequisite remediation and making co-requisite the model because of the results that we see. So I'm going to focus on 3 types of assessment. The first is outcomes data, which is a qualitative assessment. So how do you know if co-requisites are working and if they're meeting the goals that I just talked about? Are you saving students time and therefore money because of the cost of tuition? And are you increasing success? There will be a qualitative assessment that I want to talk about through student voice. And the last one is more internal. We know from the work that we've done helping states to scale co-requisite support around the country, it's not a one and done proposition, but I want to talk about continuous improvement because that's an important type of assessment that the faculty lead. So I'm going to start here and feel free to put the answer in the chat. So your goal is to maximize student success. You have a 70% or an 80% pass rate. Which of the two pass rates for a college level class helps your college achieve the goal? Love to see someone respond in the chat. Well, Sarah says 70%, the lower 70% pass rate helps. Saying 80%, okay. We had two brave souls. Oh, some more coming. Okay, well, I appreciate the responses. We're seeing, oh, we're not seeing any one response. We're seeing, and Paul, thank you, because Paul said it depends on the class. And that's exactly right. It's a trick question. And I'm going to go through why that is. And this might seem straightforward, but I assure you this is an error that we find across the board when we talk about co-rec implementation, even amongst math faculty. I know I've done this work in some states where we've gone through this and come back and they've still made this error. And that is the confusing of these three things. What does it mean to have success? What is pass rate? And what is throughput? And so I'm going to go through some slides and I apologize in advance. They get a little bit wonky, but I'm with math folks, so it won't be that wonky. But it's important that we understand how these three concepts relate to each other. And this is based off, this is a theoretical model. Again, this is, we actually have other slides I can show you with data from real schools, but one of the biggest issues in traditional remediation is that of attrition. So you see here in this model of 10 students that may start a course a few levels behind. After that first semester, what you see in the orange are students who did not complete the course. So that would be students who failed the course. But what you have in white is students who either neither enrolled once they were placed into that class because, gosh, I'm going to have to take all these semesters, or they might have passed the class and then stopped enrolling afterwards. And so you have this problem of attrition that's confounded more than just from pass rates by themselves. And you can see what happens that after multiple semesters, in this case, it's showing 3 levels of remediation till that gateway course. By the end, you'll have 1 out of 10 students who are actually getting to and through the gateway class. And the reason why it's important is we could look just at the orange. And let's say if you had a pass rate of 70% of your class and you did 70% of, start with 100, take 70% of that, 70% of that, 70% of that, 70% of that. You see the compounding impacts of attrition. But that's even more so when we talk about the students who pass the course, but life happens and for whatever reasons don't continue on. So let's put this in actual numbers and we're going to build up to 100, but I'm starting with at that lowest level of the co-rec class, that first entry level class. This again is going to be theoretical, but to show the point. And I've shared with Jen Sponracki not only this presentation, but there's a companion document that we've shared with you that goes through all of this. She'll send it out afterwards and also has some charts. It's in a Word document, but the charts open up in Excel where you can actually fill in the information for your particular college and it'll actually chart out the information. But I want to go through this slowly. So let's say you have an initial class. It's that first prerequisite class, and you have 25 students who enter that class. We're going to go off of, remember I said 70 or 80, let's go off of the higher pass rate of 80%, which would mean that 20% do not pass. And while I usually don't like taking a deficit approach, there's mathematical reasons, so it's easier to take that 20% to show 20% who do not pass would be 5 out of 25 students. In this model, if 30% of students stop enrolling, it's another 7.5 students. So in total, 12.5 students continue from that first course to the second course. 12.5 students, so half have not. But this is only the first level of remediation. So what happens is, then there's a second level above that. So the students who are at that lowest level, we started with 25. Of those 25, only 12.5 of them, and I realize half is not a full student, we're doing some mathematical modeling, 12.5 students actually enrolled in that second level. So when we take that 80% pass rate, that means 20% of that 12.5 students do not pass the course. That equals 2.5 students. And we're keeping things consistent all the way through. So 30% who maybe were passed into that second course and never enrolled, or actually took the course and passed it, but didn't enroll afterwards. 30%, that's another 3.75 students. So what happens from that initial 25, from that first course, then becomes 12.5 in the second course. So if we look at their progress all the way through, we started with 25. By the time we get to the third prerequisite course, we're at 6.25 students. But we need to look at the whole cohort, because there was another 25 students in this model that started just at prerequisite level 2. They weren't all the way at the lowest level, they were at the second level. So 25 more students entered, and we take the same math that we did the first time. So 80% passed means 20% did not pass. They failed the course. That's 5 students. Another 30% either said, I'm not even going to enter in, or maybe they did. They passed the course, but they stopped enrolling before their next course. It's another 7.5 students. So of that second group, it's 25 students who started, 12.5 who continue. So finally, just to get to the college level course, we're going to take that same cohort that we started with of 25, and we're going to carry that through. So starting with that 25 in that first course, only 12.5 or half of those continued on to the second prerequisite remediation course. By the time we got to the third course, it was 6.25. And by the time we get to the college level course in this mathematical model, 25 who started were at 3 students, 3.125 students who actually enroll in that college level course. Now we added another 25 students who started at that second level course. And we see that it got to 6.25. And then those who were at the highest level of remediation, that prereq high level, the third one of the 25 was half that started. So now when we finally get to, it's not just getting to that college level course, it's to and through the college level course. So we're taking 100 students and we're dividing it evenly for sake of argument. 25 in the lowest level of prerequisite, 25 in the next lowest level or the middle level, 25 at the highest level of remediation, which means 75 students who tested below college level, 75 students who needed some form of remediation, and then 25 students who tested directly into that college level course. So now when we look at the pass rate, 80% pass rate, we're keeping that consistent all the way through, 20% did not pass. We're not looking at who stopped enrolling beyond this because we're saying that this would be the terminal math course. So total 25 plus 25 plus 25 plus 25. We have 100 students who started. We have an 80% pass rate at 3 different levels of prerequisite remediation. We would have 37.5 students who actually get to and through and past that college level course. Now the problem with this is, and this is something where 2 things can be true at once. If I am that math faculty member, I can be really proud of my pass rate. I had an 80% pass rate. I'm doing really good. I'm an awesome teacher. My students are well served in my class because I have an 8% pass rate. But what you're not seeing is what's hidden is the students who never make it to my college level course. So let's take those same numbers. In this case, we're keeping this 80% pass rate. And in a co-requisite support class, everybody is in the college class. Some are taking it with a co-requisite support attached to it, those who need remediation, and some are taking it as a standalone. Well, we kept things consistent, and we said 75%, 75 students of the 100 needed remediation, so they're going to take it as a co-rec for modeling purposes. And there was 25 who took it as a standalone, so we kept those the same. We kept the same pass rate, 80%, meaning 20% did not pass. So 15 students of the 75 did not pass, 5 of the 25 did not pass. And then when we look at that combined at 80% pass rate, because there is no attrition into the next course, and there's not multiple iterations of those who failed on top of those who failed, on top of those who failed. Of those 100 who started, 80 would pass. So the difference between these two is keeping things the same of an 80% pass rate. The problem is structural. Now, there's a lot we can talk about in the classroom as well, but there's a structural piece that you get a difference of 37.5 who are actually getting to and through the college course versus 80. So the question I started with, and it was a trick question, I appreciated that not everyone fell for it, was what's better if your goal is student success, a 70% or an 80% pass rate? And I believe, was it Paul who said, yeah, it was Paul who said it depends on the class. Well, the class is the same at some level because we're talking the college level class. What's better, a 70% or 80% pass rate? But what we need to account for, again, the principles that I started with, what we're looking to measure is what's the impact on time and therefore money for students, and what's the impact on success. Well, when we look at it from a time perspective, I'll go back a couple slides. Students may take anywhere between 1 and 4 semesters just to get to and through that college class, which is between 1 and 4 semesters worth of tuition, as opposed to a single semester. So we know when we're assessing it this way on the time and money standard, co-rec does a significantly better job. But when we look at throughput, not pass rate, so this is of those who started, how many got to and through the college level course? When you go through the traditional prerequisite remediation, and again, we were doing a mathematical model, we have real data as well, it mirrors this. It depends on your numbers on your campus. But with that model, even with an 80% pass rate, a higher pass rate, those that got to and through, 37.5. If I lower it to a 70% pass rate, what this shows is your pass rate in your college level course can stay the same and it can go down. In this case, it is a 10% decrease of pass rate, going from 80% to 70%. If I'm that math faculty, you have to be careful because I could say, are you kidding? Since we instituted co-requisites, my pass rate has gone down. That's a true statement. But the other true statement is student success has gone up. In this case, with this mathematical model, it's doubled. We've actually seen in states where we've pulled the data, doubling, tripling, I've even seen quintupling of throughput rates when co-requisites have been fully scaled, which is the reason why we say it should be scaled, and that should be the norm. We also have to grapple with, however, that two things can be true at the same time. As I mentioned, what a math faculty member may see in their classroom may feel different. They may have students, you may have students in your classes who you did not see before. And sometimes we hear complaints, these students aren't prepared. However, we're increasing student success significantly. And it is our job as educators to think about how we run our courses and the pedagogy and the tools that we use in our course to deal with the students who are entering our courses. Because just by weeding them out so that they never show up is not an okay response if our job is to increase student success. If our job is to make sure that we make the changes in our institution, in this case, structural changes and pedagogical changes in the instruction of a co-requisite course, they're going to increase for more students getting to and through that first college level course. So the companion piece that I have shared that will get sent out will go through this in detail. It will show the mathematical models, but it also has places where you and your college will be able to put in your own information and be able to chart that either aggregated overall or by specific population, because we also know that certain student groups are disproportionately placed into remedial courses. And this is one of the ways that we are able to address those concerns. So going back to what I started, Throughput and course pass rate are not the same. Course pass rate only looks at the measure of that particular course. In fact, I just received an email early this week. It was from a different state and it happened to be English, where they were sharing, they saw huge increases when they fully scaled co-requisites, and they compared the course pass rates for students who went through the remedial track versus those who went through the co-requisite track. The remedial track, since it was scaled, was historical data, as well as those who just took the college level course. Interesting, in this case, they found that the pass rate was highest for co-requisite. It was even surpassing those of those who took the standalone English course. What I wrote them back is, as tremendous as the results were, they were saying, I forget, 2 or 3-fold increases in pass rates. I encouraged them to look at throughput rates, because when you look at the pass rate, the students who never make it to your class are not seen in those numbers. They disappear. And those students are real. They're students who we weren't serving. So whatever impacts they saw just in the pass rate would be magnified even more. One more thing that I'll mention is in the model that I showed you, the throughput rate, if you notice, started 3 levels down, which is 1 semester, 2 semester, 3 semester, then the college level course. At Complete College America, we like to say, look at your throughput rate of how are students getting to and through that college level course within 1 year. You could do within 1 semester, but within 1 year, because once if a student fails the course, and you could say, well, there's no way that student in the lowest level of remediation is going to pass the course, which I think proves the point why remediation is harmful to students, because of the amount of time that it takes, the amount of money that it takes, and then the high attrition rate, which means the students who actually get through might do very well. They typically do, but that's because those who do are the survivors. So the other thing that can be true in your class, you can say, but the students who start at the lowest level, they pass my courses at really high rates. Chances are they will, because they've survived a system that's meant and designed, intentionally or not, to weed them out. So they've survived through a system that's not built for them, as opposed to the larger number of students, even if it's a smaller percentage, larger number of students who get through. So throughput starts with the cohort, those who would be placed in either prerequisite remediation or co-requisite, and how they get to and through the college course, which is different than just the pass rate for the college course itself. Similarly, the course pass rate is not the best measure of co-requisite success. It's a measure of how students are succeeding in that college level course for those that get to that college level course. But if you're looking at how the college is serving the students, college or university is serving the students who come to you, then you're going to be missing that. So finally, if you really want to look at co-requisite success, we need to do the measure around throughput. Brian, I see your question in the chat. It's a great question. I'm focused on assessment in today's session. I'm going to focus on 2 more points. Could also do other sessions, as can the Dana Center, on the pedagogy. That's not the focus of today's presentation, so I apologize that I'm not going to be focusing on the pedagogy of the classroom. Happy to talk about that other times. I want to pause here and see if there's questions about looking at the success from a qualitative approach for your math courses in your colleges. And feel free to put them in the chat. I'm also happy if people want to come off of mute to be able to voice things over. Brian, I'm going to voice over the other Brian, just so people can hear the question. Do you think the data would change significantly if you looked at a cohort of non-traditional students who have been out of school for a significant amount of years, have a large number of those students? It's a good question. So I can answer it somewhat directly or perhaps indirectly, I think, based off of the research. So research that I've seen has looked at, the first answer is not going to respond directly to your question. The improvements for students at all levels of preparation as measured by the ACT, whether that's the fairest measure or not, it's a measure that's been used to be able to say, what are people's math skills? And this data is out of Tennessee, and what they found, and I believe it might have been replicated in Georgia, was students at all levels of academic preparedness, whether they were at a 19 ACT or a 14 or below ACT, had better throughput outcomes when they went through co-requisite success than traditional prerequisite remediation. That's not necessarily the same as someone who's been out of school for a long period of time. What I will say, though, is that the success that we've seen has been across the board. And so, for example, Complete College America did a report out of Georgia, University System of Georgia, and this will answer Whitney's question as well, as their difference in data collected from 4 years versus 2 years. That report's called Co-Requisite Works. And one of the things that they looked at was the differences between traditional prerequisite remediation. They then went to a compressed model, and then they went to a full co-requisite at scale. And the reason why I cite them, and it'll speak to both of your questions, is in the system, they have four-year universities. They also have community colleges. They have open access. They have Research One. They have HBCUs. They have HSIs. They have rural institutions. They have urban institutions. They have every kind of college that you can think of. And the results were unequivocal across all of those, where they actually in math saw more than a tripling of pass rates, or sorry, throughputs for their math. English is typically a little bit lower because usually the starting throughput is higher for English because there's usually less students who are put in remediation. So they were dealing with all kinds of students and institutions, including those open access institutions, which would include students who've been out of school for a number of years. Some of that has to do with pedagogical reasons and the asset-based approach, but it's been seen, the results have been seen across the board, regardless of what kind of institution. Depending on the state, sometimes remediation is seen more at the 2 years and because of the open access nature versus if there's some level of selectivity for getting into the college, but we've seen it across the board. There's a question for Jennifer, and I don't know if Jennifer, if you're able to come off to answer it. Will KBOR be using this far more meaningful throughput rate for the measurement lens instead of using course pass rate in its assessment of the programs?
Yeah, really great question, John. Thanks so much for bringing that up. I'll give a partial answer and say I hope that many of you can attend the CCAA launch event, CCA KBOR launch event that we're having coming up in February. We're going to have a session there talking about how do we as a system want to look at the effectiveness of the work that we're doing, and then how do each individual institutions want to look at effectiveness, right? Because the measures that the system might opt to look for will be part of the story, and it's likely the case that there'll be additional ways that you want to look at your data on your own campuses. So no decisions are final, John, but I think presentations like this and what we'll see at the launch event will help the system determine what and how they'll measure effectiveness.
So I'm from CCA, so I can say whatever I want. I would certainly encourage it. And the reason why I went through this slowly is the reason why we developed, and I was the one who developed this resource, which Jen will be sharing out afterwards, came from a state where we were doing co-requisite work. We were working with an institution, and it was a math faculty member when we came back after the first semester and said, so we want to report how are things going. And he said, my pass rates have gone down, even after we had shared the difference between throughput and pass rate. And then we went through and showed, but student success has gone up. You have more students who are actually getting to and through, who are passing through the course because those other students are not being weeded out. It's like, oh, that's right. And this is very, very easily confused, but it's really profound. I sometimes talk about it with like the Harry Potter invisibility cloak. You don't see what you don't see. So the students who disappear are just not seen, but these are students who want to get a college degree, who matter. And when we remove them from the data, we're doing a disservice not only to them, but we're doing a disservice to our institutions. And that's also why I shared with you the faculty perspective that you may see things differently in your classes, even as success goes up. So I'm going to shift gears. I started off with qualitative data. And I would encourage that to be kept both at the individual institution and at the system level. But I want to talk about student voice. So in another state that we worked with, when we came back, it was interesting. They sent me an email and said, oh, some of the instructors just asked at the end of the semester, what did you think of this course? You know, we're doing something new with co-requisite. And we thought you might want to see some of the responses. And so they sent them to me. And I saw them and they're golden. And I'm going to share them with you because I want to share how student voice is important, not just for what they said, and I will voice them over, but more for how you use student voice in a very candid way. They weren't searching for positives, but to tell you something about the differences when you make this change, because while it seems really simple, it's really a fundamental shift. So one student commented, I definitely feel more confident in my skills and ability to tackle problems. Okay. I know there was a question about pedagogy. I said that's not the point of this presentation, but I will say it is a different pedagogy when you do a just-in-time teaching methodology. And it needs to include both some of the content pieces with math, but some of the non-content or non-cognitive pieces focused on the affective domain. In another state that we worked with, we had a math professor who, in a panel, said that this non-cognitive affective domain, how students feel stuff, was like very uncomfortable for him. He's a math professor. That's what he got his degrees in. So he tried it. And the first semester, he didn't do a really good job at it. And the second semester, he kept at it because, you know, he's open to learning. And he said, and then when I started doing it right, it made more of a difference than anything in his entire career in teaching. Okay, so this quote, this is where I said it was golden. They just sound like these small things, like there's a nugget in there that says something. We're talking now about confidence. Sometimes it might be someone's math skills. Maybe it's not, or maybe it's a combination. I've been out of school for 10 years and I don't even know if I belong in school. I'm the only one in my family who's ever gone to college. I went to a really not very good high school and I didn't feel really welcome. I'm not sure I feel confident. We can talk about stereotype threat and things that students bring. This student said it felt more confident. I like learning at a slower pace and because we have time to break down the problems to have a better understanding. Just-in-time teaching, there's a question of whether co-requisite has its own syllabus and content or not, because if you're really backwards mapping and following what's happening that day in that college level course, you have to be flexible and it's going to change. Okay, slower pace, that college level course, it's going at a clip. I can follow some of it, but there's parts I'm having trouble. And then I go to my co-rec class and they help me with what I'm doing there. Maybe the building blocks that maybe I should have known. Take the example of someone who was out of high school for a while. I don't really remember how to do fractions, but conceptually I can still do it, but I need some of that refresher to bring it back to mind, to practice a little bit. And then I can get there. I don't need 3 semesters to do that. Okay, I can slow it down. I can break things down into those pieces. I don't think my limited algebra skills were an issue. I think this professor did a fantastic job of trying to help everyone along, regardless of where they were at with their knowledge. So this talks a little bit about, this is no longer the sage on the stage. This is in K-12 differentiated learning, understanding where students are at. And so today I'm going to group the students. I'm going to do a mini lesson with this group of 4 students. I'm going to have these group of 5 students do something else, and then I'm going to bring them all back together for something else because of what we're doing in class. I didn't have any idea about how this class is going to be. I just want to give it a try, and I did not want to go for the other 3 math classes. Good, I made that decision. The outcome is definitely positive. On the first day of the term, I was all nervous, frightened, lost, and had very little hope. But today, as the term ends, I feel confident, and moreover, I'm thankful to you for being a great teacher and making this learning experience a cakewalk. Thanks a ton. If you notice, we didn't edit these. Talking about the difference between 3 classes versus 1 class, there's something structural in here. There's feedback about, I was really nervous. So think about if you're really nervous and you're going into something, you're not sure if you feel belong, and they just start going at a rapid pace and there's not that care for you. That attention to where that student was at ended with, I felt really nervous, very little hope, and I'm leaving confident, more of a thanking you for being a great teacher. I think taking a co-rec was incredibly helpful. I think that learning about the topics in the co-rec class and then going over it again in the regular class was really beneficial to making the information stick in my brain. Taking a co-rec class gives students extra time to study and learn on a topic, while also allowing more time to talk to the teacher if needed. One of my favorite things about taking a co-rec was hearing about and learning about the topics before the regular math class. In this case, the co-rec was before the class. Sometimes they do them after. I never felt like things were just thrown at me during class. Yes, I still struggled and had to study, but in the college level class, I'd always have at least a rough idea of what to do because I'd already done NCOREC. I definitely recommend it to other students to take a NCOREC class as well. So I talked about the affective domain, but other parts are reviewing what someone should have known for the class already, previewing what's coming up in the next class, lots and lots of practice. And we see that in this response. That helped. If I just took that college level class, maybe it was fast, but I got a preview of it. I knew where things were going. I saw it before. I got more practice with it. And what I like in here is there's productive struggle. It's okay for students to struggle. We want that. And I think about it on my campus when I worked at a school that scaled co-requisite. Similar to this person, what they talk about in math, they had to hear it a few times. I had to hear about co-recs because it didn't make sense to me. It logically didn't fit. What do you mean a student who can't do fractions should go into college algebra? A lot to unpack, like how do we know college algebra? How do we know they can't do fractions? Conceptual knowledge versus procedural knowledge. I had to hear it over and over, and I had to go through that productive struggle to understand co-recs, just as this student had to go through productive struggle to be able to get through the math. Your math professors, if let's say you're not someone who speaks foreign language, are you going to get it on the first try? Maybe that iteration is helpful. I wish I'd known how much time this class was going to take. Even though I didn't get the best grade, I'm proud of all the work I've done. What I love about this, these aren't, everything is wonderful. I didn't get the best grade, but the student passed. And that's different than failing or stopping out, never to return, and thinking of not just your math class, but of college as a place that's not for me. I also wish I knew how much time this was going to take. That's for us as instructors and advisors to be able to tell our students, instead of taking 3 courses, you're doing this in 1 semester. It will be more time. So get yourself prepared for that. Anticipation anxiety, right? Get ready for that. But look at what you're saving in the long run. The course work was perfect in that there was enough to assist me in learning the concepts. You went above and beyond to provide extra assistance whenever I needed it. This is my favorite part, which was pretty frequent. And you never experienced any annoyance. Can't do that if you're on the stage and you're just moving on and leaving someone behind. You're always finding time in the regular class or in the co-requisite class to meet students where they're at, to be able to get them up, and hopefully using other students in that class as well. And you never express any annoyance. I didn't feel dumb in not understanding the material, but I was able to get there. I wish I would have known how supported and welcomed someone at my math level would be going into stats. Working with Excel was very useful. This Excel demonstrations were great visuals. Whether this is an adult learner or a student who's just coming back, it goes back to the last one. I did well because of the assets that I brought, and institutionally because you as a faculty supported me. You welcomed me, you supported even someone at my level. It wasn't, I don't think you're going to be able to do it. It wasn't, I've seen students like you. It was, even at your level, we're going to support you, and we know that you can make it through. I was very grateful to have this class as an option. As someone who is a second time around student, here's that adult learner, who hasn't taken a math class in at least 8 years, I was worried about how I was going to be able to fully understand and pass the class, that anticipation anxiety. The co-rec class was great because it gave us a preview of what we'd be learning in the next class. For me, this made things less overwhelming because I felt like I was going into the lectures having at least a basic idea of the learning objectives. One could say that's also good teaching, sort of that pre-knowledge to get students ready. The instructor did an amazing job not only of giving us assignments that would further our learning, but also made it a fun environment where people could be honest about their achievements and struggles. I would highly recommend people take this class. People could be honest, I'm struggling, I'm doing well. They made it fun. When we see great co-requisite classes, students are not just sitting in their chairs, they're up, they're moving around, they're grouped in this ways, everyone's at the board, you're doing fun activities, you're doing activities that have nothing to do with math, that deal with anxiety, that deal with doing an autopsy of an exam that you've already studied, of how do your learning habits fit with this, talking about how this math course relates to your real life. Personally, I think I really benefited from our co-requisite class. It really helped me to achieve me to have access to my teacher in a smaller class setting where I could ask questions, what we learned. In the main class, it's hard to hear other questions get answered. The work helped me with learning hard concept where I needed lots of repetition. Remember I said, lots and lots of practice. Spent 5 to 7 years since I took high school math, and I struggled a lot through math through high school. So I had quite a few holes in my learning, and the co-rec class helped me fill those holes. I've learned in this class I'm actually good at math. This not only turns someone on to math, but think about someone who wasn't even sure if college was for them or the idea of higher education. This impact goes way beyond the math class alone. And we had some from faculty as well. All the students who came every day, did their work and passed class. Many got A's, and the follow-up, a different instructor. I did not dumb down the material in any way in deference to their lack of background. So when you're teaching a co-rec class connected to a college level class, the college level class is a college level class. That does not change. That rigor stays the same. Brandon put in the chat, it's great to see the positive impacts of the classes. From students, do you have more examples of students who find the co-rec is who didn't find it as useful, who could potentially avoid some of those concerns that we offer? I don't have those with me here, Brandon, but I would make two comments. First of all, wonderful first name, Brandon. Second comment is what I'm talking about is ways that I'm going to encourage you in Kansas to assess your co-requisites. I think I would encourage you to do qualitative assessment, focus on throughput. I would encourage you to also do qualitative assessment through student voice. Now, the reason I could have just said, ask students what they think, and we could have done this in 1 minute. But the reason why I read these through you and gave some running commentary, and somewhat speaks to Brandon's comment, is that student voice, you need to then analyze, and what are the learnings that you can take from there to improve your courses? What are the things that maybe you didn't even realize you were doing in the course that were great? What were the things that maybe you weren't doing enough of, or that even despite those efforts, students weren't doing well? You're going to get that from students, and I agree with you, Brandon. You can learn just as much from the students who are not being successful. I will tell you on a side note, there's been some research out of Tennessee that this was not their major finding, but buried in the research, I found it very interesting. Students who failed their co-rec and their college level course typically were failing most, if not all, of their other courses, which was saying that there was other issues and wasn't just the co-requisite model. But I would say find out from the students, ask those questions in an open way where you're looking for the good or the bad. And that's why I like some of those. I didn't do that well in the course, but I made it through. Get that honest voice, but then find out not just what's going on in your classroom. I would encourage you as a department within your institutions or across campuses, get together, bring the good, bring the ones that are not so good, the negative ones, and look at those for trends. So not just what are you seeing in your classroom, but what are the trends you're seeing across your college or across multiple college? What are the things that are working and what are the things that are not working? And so this is going to bring us to the last point of assessment that I want to talk about, which is continuous improvement. Complete College America is steadfast on co-requisite being scaled. However, we'll often get the question of what's the best model? And I'm going to say that there's no one right answer because it's going to depend on your local context in Kansas and your local context at your college or university. So should it be 1 credit or 2 credits or 3 credits? Not just the credit hours, but what type of credit is it? Is it a lecture class? Is it a lab class? Because that can change the number of hours. Well, the number of hours that students have versus how faculty get paid has impacts. Should those credits be college level for the co-rec class, or should they not be college level, below college level? Well, some of that might depend on other issues around transfer or how they fit with when we look at the completion, graduation requirements and transfer agreements. Instructor pairing, is it the same faculty teaching the co-rec and the college level course? Is it different faculty? The instructor qualifications, there's ramifications on that. If you need a master's in the content area, not all dev ed instructors are qualified. So that's going to depend on your local context. Student mix, is it cohort or commingled? Is it 25 students in the co-rec class who are the same 25 in the college level class? Or do you like an ALP model of the Community College of Baltimore County, where it's 12 students who are in the co-rec class? It's a smaller class, and they join an additional 12 for 25 total, I'm rounding up, in the college level course. I already mentioned the completion, but there's impacts on financial aid, on scheduling, on campus needs, on grading. Is the grade in the co-rec the same as the college level course? Is it separate? Is it pass fail? What happens if a student passes the co-rec but fails the college, or vice versa? What I'm going to suggest is there's multiple right answers for this. And they get complex when you put them together, because now you start saying, okay, if I just look at only co-rec students versus combined students versus 1 versus 2 versus 3 credits in a commingled or cohorted classes, you have a lot of variables. You need to be able to do what's right for you. And this is where communities of practice matter. It's getting together with other math faculty, and I would also say English faculty teaching English co-recs, because while the content is different, there's a lot you can learn from each other, to discuss what's working, what's not working. What are the best practices and why? And looking at it through multiple lenses. So there's the structural solutions, some of the things that I just talked about, those course credit and instructor pairing pieces. But you also have curriculum and pedagogy. So how are you ensuring that you're not just compressing all of the material you used to teach in 3 prereq classes into a single co-req class? Because then you're not changing the pedagogy. How are you incorporating that active learning? How are you being culturally responsive and the metacognition, affective domain, validation theory? All of that is outside of necessarily the content, but changes the course directly. And then we can start talking about ways that you anticipate some of the difficulties that students are having in certain areas, and how are you incorporating the review, the preview, the lots and lots of practice. And then on top of it, there's different ways that the co-req can be done. So it could be college course Monday, co-req Tuesday, college course Wednesday, every other day. You could do it where this is, is the co-req course before or after the college course? Is it doubled up, like Tuesday and Thursday, it's the co-req and then the college course? Or is it the college course and the co-req course? I can't tell you that there is one right answer. I can't tell you that there's one wrong answer, but I can tell you that you need to do what's best for your college. And this is where, when we think about the idea of praxis, which is focused a lot more in K-12, but we're seeing it in higher ed as well, which is you make one change in how you're doing your college level class and you see what the impact is. And then you compare that with others. And so it's active research. It's not research to be published, but it's action-oriented research and coming together. So it's not just you in your classroom, but you're talking with your colleagues across your college and across other colleges to be able to say, we need to learn. One of the things that we know from evaluations we've done in other states where we've scaled or helped them scale co-requisite support, a couple things very loudly and clearly. Co-reqs need to be driven, led, owned by the faculty. Yep, policy is mandating it, absolutely. But you're not faculty just buying into it. You need to be leading it. Because the second thing is it's not a one and done. You've instituted co-reqs and that's it. It's iterations to finding out how do you tweak and make better. I've heard of some campuses that we're starting to look at, should there be differentiated co-reqs, a 1 credit versus a 3 credit? What would that look like? That's a great thing to explore. Does it make a difference? Does it not make a difference? And the reason cross-institutionally is if you make a change on your campus, how might that impact the transfer requirements and how that course is being brought in at another campus? And so I would really strongly encourage that quantitative approach, looking at not just, you can look at pass rate as well, but it's very important that you look at throughput. Looking at student voice, but not just to collect it and not just to feel good, but to turn it into, what do we do with this? What are the pieces that we learn in here? What are the students really telling us underneath that may not be as apparent? And then also from a continuous improvement, knowing that it's going to be an iterative process. So I appreciate you coming on. I want to allow time for questions from everyone as well.
You have one in the chat already, Brandon, and I'll go ahead and read it to you. So Brian asks, concerns I've seen from other instructors are that many of the students coming from the high schools are not even ready for the co-requisite classes. Not sure if this is a concern of other states who have been successful with co-requisites. Maybe I'll pause there and then I'll get to the part 2 of the question.
You can read them both. I'm looking at it now.
Also, if a student fails the co-requisite, they may have to pay for 10 credit hours if the college makes it a 5 credit hour course.
I will say, I'll answer the second part first. I have not seen any co-requisites that I know if that's a 5 credit class and a 5 credit co-requisite. Typically, I've seen a co-requisite between 1 and 3 credit hours, and the college level class I've usually typically seen as 3 or 4 credits. Where that could be an issue is ones if a student's in a co-requisite English and a co-requisite math. You can look at if they're taking them at the same semester or if they're staggered. Oh, 5 credits total for that. So I missed how someone would have to pay 10 credit hours if it's a 5 credit class. Yeah, I think that's something that you would need to be able to talk to students about, but also talk about when you're doing co-requisites. It's really important, and we have some resources that we can share. It's the case making, both for the faculty and staff. And when I'm talking advisors who are talking directly to students in the onboarding, but also how we're talking to students. What are the posters that you're putting up to explain why co-requisite is being done? And what's the problem that's solving for? And the differences in throughput rates of students who are actually achieving success of co-req versus prerequisite, and not getting through and not achieving your college dreams at all, or having to take 2, 3, 4 semesters to be able to do both. In terms of students' preparation, that's why I shared the research out of Tennessee that looked at all levels of student preparation. And there's yet to be a group that's found that's better served from prerequisite remediation. So you can look at that across academic preparation. That research also goes when you look across racial groups. There's not a group that does better with prerequisite versus co-requisite. That research also shows that for first generation students, low income students, I've yet to see a study that shows the throughput rate is better for students who go through prerequisite. That's why it's important to look at throughput and not just pass rate for those who survive. Now, what I would say is if you can find something that works better, you have a case to be made. That case hasn't been made. Oh, Robert asked a question. If they fail the co-requisite, would they need to retake both? I'm not going to share with you what Kansas is, but I'll share with you what CCA's thinking is. The co-requisite course is designed to help students with the content that they're focusing in that college level course. So when you think about it, if a student is proficient, if we think about mastery learning, and they can show that they have the skills in the college level course, but they didn't pass the co-requisite course, would you have them take, then they move on outside, let's say it's Math 101. Let's say there's a Math 102, let's say it's a sim track. Would they take the Math 102 but still have to take the co-req from Math 101? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So what I would say, this is Brandon, not Kansas speaking. If a student failed both the co-requisite class and the math college course, it would make sense for them to do both of them because they're probably in need of that support. But I'd probably also have them talk to an advisor to find out what else is going on, because there might be issues beyond the math. If they pass the math college level course but fail the co-requisite course, they've passed the gateway level course, so they should be able to move on. You also have to look at, is the co-req course just based off attendance? Is it based off assignments? Is it connected to the grading? So there's a lot in that where you have to look at how's that co-requisite course graded in conjunction, separately, or together with that college level course. And also I would say, how are you making that the co-req course something where students don't want to miss? As I mentioned, I just got data from another state. It was a particular institution where the students in the co-req outdid from pass, not through, but the pass rate than students in just the standalone college course. So that co-requisite course had tremendous value for their students. Now, if a student, so what's the other option? Failed both, failed the co-req. If they failed the math course but passed the co-req, again, you'd have to look at how that's being done. But I also believe in student agency. I think that's where you could recommend for that student, if they're retaking that college level math course, the entry gateway course, would they like to take it? You might recommend or offer them to take it with a co-req course, but maybe not require it. But if it's going to help them pass the math course that they haven't passed yet, that might be worthy. Other questions? One thing that I just noticed, by the way, in the chat, and I might mispronounce the name, to Layla, mentioned about hoping to utilize Alex and tutoring. Although this isn't just about pedagogy, I would strongly encourage, you heard me talk about active learning and moving students around. Co-requisite course is not just extra lab hours where students behind a computer and raising their hand if they have questions. That active involvement with the instructor and with peers is really very important to change what's happening in the classroom. Now, I think you can use ALEKS as a supplement together with active instruction, but I would caution against using it just in terms of even if it is using AI and just strict machine learning, because as you saw from the quotes and the reason why I read them, they all spoke about the role of the instructor with the pedagogy and how they ran the course. If there's not, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that didn't have to do with how the co-rec would be ran. That would have to do with the students not coming in ready for the co-rec. So to help them get ready to feel like they could be successful for the co-rec because their scores are so low.
I will say, and this may or may not fit with Kansas policy, so this is Brandon speaking. CUNY, for example, the city colleges of New York have fully skilled co-requisite support. And they also do have a Math Start prep program. And so when we think of it, like usually it's adult basic education students, when you sometimes get the question, what about the student who doesn't even know how to read with very, very, very low skills? And when I'm talking co-recs, I'm not talking adult basic education. So there are some states that have done that. I will tell you, I live in Colorado. They do a parachute course of basic skills, and their legislation allows it. It's in actually legislation. When I talked to the system provost or assistant provost about the parachute courses, his comment to me was, the problem is we don't have enough students to fill them, which told me, you know, it was sort of needed as that safety valve, but they found more success in the co-requisite classes. Thank you for voicing that over, though. And I hope I didn't mispronounce your name.
Brandon, we have one more question.
If students fail the co-rec course and they know they will not be successful taking it again, what are your recommendations since we will no longer be allowed to offer developmental courses? They still need to have credits that will be covered by financial aid, but they know that their skills are too low to even take the co-rec. Yeah, I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble of saying that there's no way a student's going to be successful in a college level course, no matter how much support they have or how much work they do towards that. Particularly if we take a fixed mindset, that just sounds a little, a growth mindset that just sounds a little fixed to me. Again, this would be something in the case if we're talking adult basic education, that's where I would look to that if it's a student who doesn't have the very basic levels of skill. But I will say also, I would never say that co-rec is going to have students pass, 100% of students pass the course. I wouldn't say that about any course. I don't think you're going to find any course where you have students with a 100% pass rate. So if you can find, and this is where that continuous improvement, something that works better, and you can show that students who you can clearly identify, which is key, have a throughput rate, passing that college level course in 1 year, higher than those in the co-rec, then I think it should be worth considering. I've yet to see that, but saying that there's students who don't pass that college level course, even though we've done co-recs, is not a reason to go through prerequisite remediation, because the data is really clear. CCA wrote a paper with it that prerequisite remediation is a bridge to nowhere. When you have very low double digits or often in the single digits of students starting at the lowest levels of prerequisite remediation who get to and through, that assigning them to that is also not a solution. So it might be something that we still need to do, is to find out, there are students who even with co-rec, that alone is not enough. We need to find out what works for them, but that doesn't mean that prerequisite remediation is the answer. Well, Jen, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited. I will also say for Kansas to be moving forward. The states who've gone to full scale and systems who've gone to full scale have seen, and particularly in math, like I said, doubling, tripling, I've even seen up to quintupling of those throughput rates. So while not 100%, we're making a huge difference for success of students that then we need to carry on throughout the rest of their college career. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Brandon. And we're certainly lucky within our state to have so many faculty and staff who put student success first and have been working very hard over the past few months and years even to get up to speed and ready for this implementation. So we're excited to have you come in person and get to meet the wonderful colleagues that we work with every day. All right, guys. As Brandon mentioned, there will be some additional resources available after this presentation that CCA is providing. And so I will share those out the way that we always do after the sessions. Our next presenter for today was unable to be with us, but she sent a recording. And there are times during her presentation where we'll pause and we'll do breakout rooms and things like that. So we'll still have interactions with one another throughout the presentation. But I'm going to share my screen and start that presentation. And Jolie will begin with an introduction about herself and her background. And the presentation, as you guys know from the agenda, is on this asset-based approach to our courses. So let me share my screen. And we'll get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Strategies for Success Using Asset-Based Perspectives to Transform Our System. And good Friday afternoon. I am so sorry that I can't actually virtually be with you and that I'm recording this session, but I also have time set aside to pause the recording, have group interactions, and I'm looking forward to hearing how everything goes. And so I'm going to get started. First, I'd like to share a little bit about myself. I am an author of the book Transform Your Math Class Using Asset-Based Teaching in grades 6-12, and have done research in the space of asset-based perspectives for a number of years. And I co-authored that book with Michael Steele, who is at Ball State University. I am also working with the Dana Center as a Pathways consultant and do a lot of things with launch years and co-requisites, high school course options, that sort of thing. I'm an original author of the Open Up High School Mathematics, and then I currently serve on the board of directors for the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, or NCTM, as well as the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences, or CBMS. I also in the past have been the president of the Utah Council of Teachers of Mathematics, as well as the Association of State Supervisors of Mathematics. And in our session today, we are going to focus on the areas that Jennifer reached out to me to talk about when it comes to reframing thinking and talking about equitable access to co-requisite supports. And we will also talk about sustaining teaching practices, including what are some cultural responsive conversations. And then if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about technology, but also thinking about the conversation we have today. If technology is an area that you're interested in, being able to take the conversation and resources we have from today to highlight that. So this is also kind of our agenda, which is talking about what do asset-based perspectives even mean? How do we identify those assets and increase outcomes for students, but also increase outcomes for us? As Jennifer mentioned, the group here asked to talk about how do we talk about reframing our thinking? I know that's been life-changing for me. And then also we have a period of time where we are going to go into breakout rooms and look at different pieces of research, but also articles on co-requisites. And then in the end, thinking about what new ideas or what ways that we want to move forward with the conversations you're already having. And these are the outcomes, which basically, whatever we're doing, thinking about the fact that asset-based perspectives are a continuum. It's not like binary asset versus deficit, but kind of like that whole thing of when you know better, you do better. And so when we reflect, and then as we reflect, we apply, we take things that we are already doing that are asset-based and think about how to make them more asset-based, or in some situations, even thinking about things that maybe have been less asset-based or even deficit, and shifting that work. And then in the end, the goal is to transform our system and ensure we have more access, equitable access to students having access to coursework, but also, of course, being successful with that coursework and graduating from our systems and being productive citizens. So we're going to start in the chat box. I'm not sure actually how this goes with the recording, but in the chat box, I'd like for you to type what does asset-based perspectives mean to you. Please type that into the chat box, but do not hit enter. We are actually going to do something called a waterfall, which means we'll all hit enter at the same time and then kind of review each other's responses. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm just like, when you hear asset-based perspectives, like, what does that mean to you? What do you currently consider asset-based perspectives? Okay, and wherever you are, go ahead and hit enter now. And if you're still finishing up typing, that's totally fine. But being able to hit enter and then also read some of the information that has been shared by colleagues is great right now. Jennifer, I think if you are the one facilitating, if you'll kind of just share some of the responses, and if there's anyone we want to stop and highlight or discuss something about that is great.
Okay, guys, sounds like I have an assignment to do. I'll just read a few because I know you guys are following along in the chat too. But we have some excellent definitions in here in terms of build on the student experiences, focusing on the strengths that the students bring with them to the classroom, viewing what students bring to the table versus focusing on maybe their deficits or what they're lacking, thinking about your strengths. And I'm not sure if the individual who wrote that meant as the faculty member and the student, but I think it's great to think about both of those. Focusing on the positives, growth mindset, and then appropriately, some of us indicated we really weren't sure in this context or in general what the asset-based perspective was referring to. So I'll go ahead and push start.
And I'm going to go on and share with you that when we started this work, actually, and it was just like during COVID when we were talking about, you know, so many people were talking about learning loss, but then we were also talking about like, how are people just like persevering and making things happen for themselves and for students, and how like also noticing other things that became a highlight during COVID. And it's kind of hard to think about, like COVID was such a traumatic experience and literally had our world stop, but also at the same time, other things came about because of the experiences that we had. And so when we talk about asset-based perspectives, we start with what is. And when we say we start with what is, we really mean like we start with what is versus like what is not. And what we mean by that is that when we think about what are the knowledge, talents, experiences that we bring to the table or the fence of knowledge, or we think about like what students do know as opposed to what they don't know, then these things tend to happen. And we were noticing this over and over. So when we focus on what students know, it's like the community of learners feels like we are increasing that sphere of belonging. Like there's not the here's who does know and here's who doesn't. It doesn't create that space of othering, if you will. It also builds on students' strengths. It also talks about how do we start hearing what students are thinking. I know that for myself, this was huge. Like I remember that I used to be a big advocate of having students talk to each other and sharing their answers, sharing their ways of thinking. And I would go around and I would listen, I would monitor. But I noticed that what I was doing is I was listening for them to say what I wanted them to say, like the procedure that I had thought of or the strategy I was using. And that real shift in like hearing students so that you're valuing their way of thinking and their contribution was a huge way of focusing on what students know, and then me learning how to elevate their knowledge using their strategy instead of trying to convince them to change their representation or their way of thinking to become my strategy. Another area that I think is incredibly important is thinking about how do we recognize students as capable. I did put a QR code here, and then I'll share this again later. If you are interested in learning more about asset-based perspectives or participating in different groups that talk about asset-based perspectives, this is a link that will take you to a little Google form. And then starting in February, you'll start seeing like a once a month kind of little newsletter of ways of getting together. This whole conversation about recognizing students as capable also is thinking about that it is interesting that we all want to talk about how important it is that we believe in students. But sometimes our systems have things in place that kind of show that we don't believe in students. Like, oh, you don't get this thing yet, so therefore we're going to put you in this class so you get that thing. Which, whether we realize it or not, it kind of makes it so that it's like students see themselves as like, well, I'm in this group and others are in some other group, as opposed to we all bring different things to the conversation. And yet some students may have deeper or stronger connections between certain math topics, but by placing students in different courses based on their perceived abilities or inabilities can sometimes really make students feel like that they're less, they definitely make students feel like they're less capable. And so let's talk a little bit more about the what is BART. Here's an example. This actually comes from high school, but one of the big ideas in high school mathematics is talking about understanding, comparing, and representing functions. We want them to recognize whether something is linear, exponential, quadratic, polynomial in general, if it's rational function, all that good stuff. And so we're going to talk about looking at pattern, for example, and you may recognize this pattern, but what I would like for you to do right now is think about the fact that if in class, this is the goal, we want students to use and connect representations. We also want to identify the function type, and we also want them to like listen to each other as far as like how they're seeing the pattern grow, what function type it might be, what representations they might use. As you're looking at this pattern, how are you seeing it grow? How would you see the pattern at 3 minutes? What would be the value at 3 minutes? Okay, so if we had more time, I also would have actually had like given you the task and had you kind of go do a little bit more. But as we're talking about this, and the directions being using multiple representations, I would like for you to think about like here's some student responses and here's some ways students might is like some student might like what I'm noticing is that there's like extra dot at the end. And so this student just said, I'm just going to add 4 each time. So the next set of minutes, I'm going to say +4, which is a great way of thinking about what students are understanding about that, is that they're thinking about recursive thinking, that for every minute, I'm going to add 4 dots. So thinking about the highlight of that. Another thing is that student actually, when they were sharing how they were seeing their dots, they actually showed this visualization of I see 4 dots being added at the end of each of the box, if you will. So they were kind of seeing it as a box. And then other students that were sharing were talking about, you know, given the amount of time and the number of dogs, and that they could see that there is this constant rate of change of +4 between, which also is a great way to connect to the first student who just said, I put the 4 dots and I see this box geometric model growing. And then also another student who interestingly also in their graph drew a picture of a line and kind of showing what they have going on there. You can also see a bit of an equation and the student showing the connections between the graph and the equation that is in this particular student work. And then how nice to be able to ask students to make connections between the different representations. How are they doing things similarly? Are there things that maybe are not the same? It's a great time to also have a conversation about, is this a continuous function or is it a discrete function? What makes that so? Here are a couple of other pieces of student work, which is kind of nice. Like you see another student on the left-hand side looking at this pattern. And they are showing the +4, +4, +4 representing the number of minutes. And then at 3 minutes, they have 3 4s. And then towards the bottom, you can see at M minutes, they have 4. They have at M minutes, they have 4 M groups of 4, which gives them the number of dots. It's also very interesting to me that in the way that the student wrote the table, that their equation is 1 plus M groups of 4, which I really like how their equation aligns with how they were recognizing their representation. And then they also then converted it to the B like slope intercept. And that's an interesting conversation also, right? And then the next thing is the student that is over on the right-hand side who was like, well, what would it be at 100 minutes? Instead of seeing 100 boxes like a different student did, this student actually saw it more as like petals on a flower or 4 spokes on a wheel. So you can kind of see that they were like 4 groups of X dots, which is different, right, than M groups of 4 dots. So this person saw 4 groups of M dots. Sweet. So I would like for you to think about, how does this work, or how does working on this kind of task help us focus on the assets of students? And so I'm going to ask you to also put that into the chat box. Again, it's, how does working on this kind of task help us focus on the assets of students? And as I say that, here's the table I'd like for you to be looking at and think about, like, what are some characteristics. This actually comes from the Transform Your Math class, which is one of several books that I'll be highlighting in the little bit of time that we have together today, which is the Transform Asset-Based. I don't even know if you guys can see this because of the light that's in front of us, but it's Transform Your Math class using asset-based teaching. And this is the table from page 5. So I want to be quiet for just a moment. I was working on this kind of task that was focused on the assets of students. This time, let's go ahead and put things into the chat box. Then we won't worry about waterfall. And if you are highlighting something that is from this table, please feel free to add that information into the chat box and maybe like why that's important to you. Okay, I'm going to start back now, so we pause or we can continue. I do want to talk about how this is kind of this, how this is that reframing the thinking about students in co-requisite math support classes. And I want us to think about how when we are looking at this table and we want to think about instructional routines that are implemented with the mindset that students have lived experiences. In this task, there are a lot of things that we can pull out of it. And when we're trying to pull information or trying to think about what is the mathematics that we want students to think about is how valuable it's not students choose, are you discovering linear, exponential, rational, or whatever it happens to be. As much as it is like, here's the scenario, and then students choose how to solve the problem. So having students have choice, like which representation they use, how they're organizing their information becomes really important. It's also really important in an asset-based instructional model that students have some time to think about this on their own, so that when they do go share with someone else, that they have their own ideas to bring to the table, especially our students who have been placed in developmental classes or in lower track classes. I'm doing air quotes around lower track classes in high school, is that they become anxious and less confident in their mathematics. So making sure that they have independent think time so that when they go to share with a partner, they have something to share, really kind of tries to shift it from being like one student knows and telling the other to them being able to listen and learn from one another, or even talk about how they maybe even did the same thing. That partnership really helps to expand how different people are thinking about things. And then also they start to feel more confident about what they're doing, right? Less asset-based are like, when we just tell students, here's how you solve a linear equation, or here's how you know it's linear. Like, of course, in this conversation, the task that was being presented to us, you would want the teacher to orchestrate the conversation, and you'd also want the teacher to facilitate the co-crafting that in the end, like that you see the constant rate of +4, and where are all the different ways that you see that in a representation, so that students in the future identify something to be linear and they have tools, like the representations go from being something that helps them to learn and identify to later being tools to justify that they know that something is a particular function. Also, when students are not sharing, their voices are not heard. Sometimes they feel like they understand something in class, but then they go do homework and they have a lot, like they haven't solidified what they need to from the importance of that lesson that day. And then also there becomes more of a, I'm only being able to solve the problems based on the examples that I have. And that one way and focusing on the answer really is the opposite of what we want people to think about what mathematics is about, right? We don't want them to be like, it's just about answer getting. The answer is important, but it is much more important that we are problem solvers and that we are reasoning and sense makers. So this work and reframing how students think about themselves and the work that they are doing is about being empowered and seeing themselves as, and others, by the way, as doers of mathematics, so that they appreciate why math is important in their lives and they come to believe that they can succeed in mathematics. This is not only a quote from Catalyzing Change, but it is also, and I'm going to step back a little bit, but one of the books that I also really like is The Impact of Identity in K-12 Mathematics. And this book also talks about the 5 equitable practices, which is a great place to talk about how are we going deep with mathematics, how are we affirming students and learners with the work that they are doing, and the other practices that go there. In addition, I want to highlight the TRUE framework, and they have 5 areas, and one of them is about agency, authority, and identity. And so as you read this, it's really talking about in mathematics, we want to make sure students are provided opportunities to walk the walk of mathematics and talk the talk. We want them to contribute to conversations about disciplinary ideas. We also want them to build on the ideas of others and also have others build on their ideas in ways that contribute to their development of agency, which is their willingness to engage. The more they feel capable, the more they are going to increase their willingness to engage, their ownership over the content that they are learning. So are they developing strategies? Are they learning how to make connections, like net with connections between concepts, and then also develop positive identities as thinkers and learners. We also want to talk about equitable access. That's one of the things that we are thinking about in this work when it comes to co-requisites, which really talks about how our activity structures to invite support active engagement of all students. And we also, when we say that, it's like we want them engaged in the activity of the core disciplinary content, which means that every student should be sharing an idea with someone else. Every student should have opportunity to access and make sense of. And then we also talk about the fact that it's like when it does feel, whether it's lecture style typically, or when we are just focusing on procedures or computation, it really does lend itself to classrooms where only the small students get most of the airtime. And while this is not equitable, it also creates this whole feeling again of some people know and some people don't know. And then what's hard, I think, is that, and from my own experience, is at the beginning of the year or the beginning of a semester, when you are working with a group of students who understand that they have been placed in a course because of their lack of knowledge, as a group, it's harder to get them to engage at first. It takes a lot longer to get them engaged in meaningful conversations because they have to overcome the barrier of not being capable from their past experiences where they felt that in some way. So I am going to ask you to once again think about how does this approach to coursework and reframing how we listen to students connect to asset-based perspectives, where we talk about focusing on what's known versus what's not known. How does it contribute to believing in students' abilities and connecting? And then as we're reflecting on that, what I really want us to do is be able to shift to this work and how this connects to co-requisites. So in the chat box, I would love for you to think about what are the assets of a co-requisite course. And I'm going to say versus the developmental or remedial, because we are just kind of comparing those things. Not that there are not aspects that happen within a developmental course, but from a system perspective, what are the assets of a co-requisite course? Shifting gears a little bit. And as you're thinking about that, this is going to, I don't know if it's the last time we put information into the chat box, but we are getting ready to go into breakout rooms, have conversations, and really come off mute and share information in different spaces. So if you'll go ahead and, you've been in several sessions and you've had lots of experiences yourself. I'd like for you to really just talk about what are the assets of a prerequisite course. Via chat or coming off mute.
If it's okay with everyone, let's do this via chat. I'm just watching the time. And so to ensure that we that we're concluded on time, let's go ahead and just drop those in the chat.
Okay, so I am sure that you have some things. I am putting a couple of items in here before we go into some breakout rooms and talk about this together as a group as well. When it comes to co-requisite coursework, my experience, and I also did not mention that I was the STEM coordinator and K-12 math specialist for the Utah State Board of Education for almost a decade. And one of the things that we did in our work with our Pathways conversation is really talk about what does co-requisite coursework look like in higher ed. And we went from having one institution offering this to all of our institutions offering this. And then as the leader of our Pathways in Utah, one of the things that we did is we had a group who also then really worked to, in fact, we even had a co-requisite summit, which I will share more about when we get into the session a little bit later. But things that we discovered as assets in this space are thinking about, like, when it was a developmental course, it was a developmental course that students would then choose which credit bearing course they would go into. Whereas the co-requisite course made it so that our developmental teachers were supporting and working with the main teacher sometimes, and then sometimes, you know, there were different perspectives, you know, different ways that this was being implemented. But the big shift was that instead of it being like students being like, oh, this is what you don't know, this is what turned into, you are actually enrolled in a quantitative literacy course, and these are the big ideas that are happening in that course. And so our co-requisite time is focused on supporting your knowledge of those big ideas. And that was really a huge shift because it made it so that instead of like, I'm giving you a whole thing on review and remediation and things that we thought you learned in high school or sometimes even middle school. So it turned into being like a just in case remediation, or like, I'm starting from the beginning because I think we don't know these things. It turned into just in time supports. Like, here's the big topic we're learning. Let's dig into it. And then instead of it being like, here's where you are and this is how you get up to where you need to be, it was like, here's where we are learning things and how do I support any gaps that you might have along the way. It was really powerful. Also, not only did we talk about the importance of relevance, but we also talked about like, how do we incorporate culturally responsive practices in this? And then also what connections are students engaging in. I would say that the biggest shift that happened both in high school and in higher ed is that second to the last bullet, which was instead of it being like students have to take this course to be able to understand this information to get to the next course, which to get to the next course and so forth, it was much more like mapping this web of ideas and how do we have these different experiences. And that sometimes some students may have not been as confident or competent with some of these skills down here, but through experiences of the class that was happening, that was the co-requisite class, they gained that knowledge. And it kind of made me laugh when I thought about it later. Like, as a high school calculus teacher, I had so many times where I was like, at the beginning of the year, I was reviewing pre-calculus and honestly some algebra topics that I thought were going to be so important for students to get later. And when I shifted from spending that first 3 weeks or whatever reviewing topics, even for my calculus students, and then honestly later for my algebra students, to we're starting with the content that is, and then when we need to, like, I'll throw something into it as a warm-up, or we'll think about how we are providing more of a just-in-time support. And then your higher ed people, I know that in the state of Utah, one of the things we had was Senate Bill 196 back in 2015, and it was the bill that was like, in higher ed, we have a number of students who are leaving before they're getting their 4-year degree, and in the exit survey, it showed that the top 2 reasons students were leaving without their degree was because of money and running out of funds, and then also not getting the math credit. So either having to take developmental classes and then having to retake developmental classes, or that they just were not finishing their credit bearing math course, their quantitative reasoning course, their quantitative literacy course, before they finished their degree. So what they had to do was they, sorry, I didn't mean to say what they had to do. What was happening is students were leaving. So the president of a university kind of got together and through legislation, and this person also became a senator in the state of Utah, created this bill that made it so that students in high school had access to a good QL class that would give them credits potentially in high school, or would help them so that they would not have issues in getting access to coursework in higher ed. That is another conversation that I think is really important and powerful, but I will also say that what it really did for our higher ed group is, and speaking of asset-based, I remember when that bill was first coming out, that many of us were very concerned about what about students who are going to be ready for this, or what about like what is the failure rate going to be, and I will tell you that it has actually worked out to be a very good thing for students in the state of Utah. They had less barriers to jump through, or less hoops to jump through, if you will, have less barriers. And then also, it really kind of advanced our conversation around, well, how do we support students in the courses that they're taking through co-requisites? And our data was outstanding. And then, of course, there's also this conversation about credits. How many students were earning credits, but they were not really credits toward a degree because they were in a remedial math class. And then how many semesters of developmental math or remedial math were they taking, which of course takes more time towards earning the degree. So we really just discovered, and by the way, I'm mentioning the state of Utah, but in my work with other states that have gone to the co-requisite model, or in states that I'm aware of, which we'll look at in just a bit, a lot of changes have happened, which has been really great. So implementation, going back to like, instead of thinking about it being what students can't do, it's like focusing on what matters. Instead of fixing skills that students don't know, we are providing just-in-time support versus just-in-case remediation. Instead of students receiving messages that they are not capable and they need to take a remedial math course, whether it's explicit or implicit, like students know, like I'm not in a class, the math class that's actually counting towards my degree. So being able to be in a co-requisite course that has credit bearing, at the end of the day, so many more students in everywhere that I've seen the research as well as my own experiences are passing those courses at a higher rate. They're feeling more capable. And so it kind of takes us to the time where what I would like for us to do is I have just put together 6 different articles that come from different places. And I'm going to share with you these different articles just as so that you can kind of see up here at the top of my screen. You'll see that this is from Just Equations. This is number 1, the College Math Co-Requisites, Challenges and Opportunities. This is from Complete College America, Highlight Co-Requisite Support at the State Level. This is Inside Higher Ed, number 3, Extensive Evidence of Co-Requisite Remediation Effectiveness. This is number 4 from the Dana Center, the Mathematics Pathways and Information about Co-Requisite Courses. This is actually an opinion piece, but it's a letter from the director of the Community College Research Center. This was, you can see this is back in January of 2019, but it's an article responding to research findings. And then the 6th option is co-requisite work, student success models at the University System of Georgia. So this is some of the work that they've done in Georgia. I'd like for you to choose which of these 6, so you'll notice there's 1 through 6, and choose the breakout room that is going to read the article of choice and then have a conversation within your small group. I'm going to say that this is about, we'll put the information of the links to this into the chat box, and then read the article that is of interest to you, and then discuss it. We will come back in about 15 minutes.
Okay, colleagues, Whitney and I have been chatting, and based on time, we will of course share these links with you guys after the fact so that you can read the articles and connect with your colleagues on your campus. But we're going to go ahead and continue with her recorded presentation. It looks like she's got about 15 minutes left, and we only have 20 minutes left till the top of the hour. So thank you so much for your understanding.
To debrief the articles that you've read. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout rooms. Choose which of the 6 that you are most interested in discussing. Take about 3 or 4 minutes, read the article, and then start sharing what's in the article with your colleagues and group. And then when you come back, please plan on having a presenter to share highlights and things that are relevant and important to Kansas regarding co-requisites. And we will be back in 15 minutes. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I would love for each breakout room to share some highlights and important things from the article that you read. I do want to also share this, which one of the things that I like from CCA, which is group 2, so if you're in group 2, is the conversation around that report providing best practices. So when group 2 shares out, if you guys had conversations about how to implement best practices and scale co-requisite support effectively, I think that's a really great conversation. And then also, when it comes to the opinion piece from Thomas Brock, who is the director of the Community College Research Center, talking about earning the credentials. And I really think this whole idea about was talking about isolating from their peers in college level courses and assigning multiple semesters of remediation greatly reduces their chances of completion. Whether it's this group or another group, just really talking about what is your own data showing you in the state of Kansas, or what is the information from this article that maybe you found most important. So we'll start with group 1 and then go group to group, and then you can hit record. You can start me again when you are finished with that. Thanks. I want to say thank you so much for engaging in this work and engaging in this conversation. And I'm really bummed that I'm not there to hear the conversations. I do want to say that for me, when our team was going through things, we really talked about the fact, like this quote from Maya Angelou has been so inspiring for us. Just this conversation about we've always done the best we can, whether it's in a remedial course, the developmental math courses, or the co-requisite courses. Do the best you can until you know better. But then also when you know better, or you have good research, or you have good information, like do better. And what does that look like? And I will say that I don't think that just saying or committing to saying that we're going to do co-requisite work means, okay, we're good and we're done, we've done better. I've been in places where co-requisites have turned into like, instead of it being a 3-credit course, it being a 4 or 5-credit course. And what it just means is that students go to a lab and it's where they do remedial coursework. And what that means is that the person who was teaching the developmental math class now has students coming from all sorts of different places to get help with homework. And that is not a good, or it's not the most asset-based way of supporting students and understanding the work they're doing. So I'm hoping that within the conversations you had from different groups, and also from your experiences that you've had within your own work of co-requisite, that you have experiences of what's working, what's not working. Earlier in the time that I was recording, I mentioned that I would share with you that in the state of Utah, one of the things that we did through our own pathways work within the Dana Center when I was at the state office is we had a group whose focus was on supplemental instruction. So whether it was in high school or it was in higher ed, and the higher ed group made a co-requisite summit. And if you guys haven't done this yet, it was phenomenal. It was made into, and in fact, I think the work that you're doing right now is phenomenal. The fact that you have these monthly get-togethers and talk about what's possible and how to do things, I think that is huge, right? It's reflective in and of itself, and you're learning together. But the co-requisite summit made it so that members from different institutions of higher ed all came together, and it was a mini conference that was put on, and people were sharing data, but they were also sharing like things that weren't working. Like here are things that were working. It was a celebration of more students being successful, but it was also like people were sharing ways that it felt not as successful, and it wasn't to be like, so therefore this is not successful, but it was like, how do we learn together, and how do we make these courses more meaningful for us as educators, but also for the students that we're serving. I also would like for you guys to reflect. So we've had a conversation, you've shared some things, you've read some articles. What new perspectives do you see for students taking co-requisite courses? And I'm sure that you've had things before this session and that you've had lots of great conversations, but I'm also hoping that you have something that from our conversation today feels new and kind of exciting for you. And then I also would like for you to share what new opportunities, which by the way, these opportunities can also be currently their barriers, but things that you want to be thinking about that you might anticipate or have experienced. And as you reflect and think on that, like what are the next steps? And depending on time, please feel free to pause the recording and have that conversation. Our next segment is a really short segment on technology if there's time. Okay, so what I would also like to talk about is that in the asset-based perspectives, folks, we really talk about the fact that our identities are not fixed and that our strengths are not fixed. And the more we have experiences, the more we recognize that identities and strengths are not fixed, but change with experiences. And so here's the technology segment if you have time. I know that a couple of people mentioned, like, you know, technology, if it's a hinder, and what are the opportunities that you have to utilize assets in technology is my short little snippet. I have had many conversations, as I'm sure you have, about the opportunities for access for different students and what does that mean for them when it comes to technology. This includes like being in statistics courses, data science courses. This is even true when it comes to having access to technology for a pre-calculus or calculus class. One of the things that I hone in on, and of course your conversations can be about many different challenges and things that come up, is just thinking about what are the ways that we're using technology. This also is true in K-12, but also in higher ed, is when the technology is being incorporated, how is it still continuing to provide student choice and position students for success versus focusing on answers or having students sit quietly at a computer to do something? How does the technology access students' funds of knowledge. So in other words, how are we making it so that as students are learning the technology, that they're also thinking about how am I becoming doers of mathematics or doers of statistics, as opposed to just focusing on a procedure versus the understanding, if you will. We also want to think about how the technology experiences, like for example, if you're doing something with Kodak, provide students opportunities to make decisions and self-assess. And then also, how does it help students identify their own strengths? And how can they develop? Like, how do they develop those strengths? How do they develop those strengths through experiences? And then I know sometimes the way that technology can be a barrier for us is that it positions some groups, those who have access, as being more capable when maybe it's really about access. I realize that this conversation around technology is huge, and that there are a lot of things that I think that probably, whether it's in your own institution, your own course, or within the state of Kansas, talking about what are different things that you can do so that technology can be an asset. I'm also going to say that in the space of technology, when we talk about AI, how are we thinking about using AI to our advantage? And how are we thinking about how AI can be important in students' reasoning and sense making, like, as opposed to it being that it's something that is like kids can cheat and get an answer. It's like maybe that's telling us that getting the answer is still not really the importance of mathematics. I mean, it is important, but that's not what we're learning. We're not learning 5. We are learning why something is 5 or why it makes sense to be 5. And so thinking about how technology can be used to enhance the reasoning and sense making, I think is really important. Again, opportunities to utilize assets and technology versus challenges. And I'm hoping that there's a few minutes that you guys have left, because I really want to think about, like, what is resonating for you? Is it about increasing the feeling of belonging? Is it about helping students advocate for themselves and identify their own strengths? Is it thinking about, like, what do we mean leverage what is known? Because in our system and the way we are trained, so much of our time has been spent on what kids don't know or what students don't know. So really thinking about how do we access their funds of knowledge to promote what they do know is significant. We always think of others as capable, I think, but really, what does that mean? How do we value the contributions and efforts? How are we making it so that students see and understand what they know, and then build from that, as opposed to giving them procedures or giving them one way of doing something? And then how are we also thinking about the belief in others? Hoping something here resonates for you. And in thinking about that, I'm going to be like, well, let's do this. When it talks about prerequisites, how do we provide students a break from traditional methodology? How do we create a shift to reframe how we think about and focus on key ideas in a prerequisite course that align with the student career aspirations? So one of the things that the whole Pathways work started working on, and also the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences, is we talk about college-ready students, but are we also talking about student-ready colleges? Like, what are we doing in higher ed to make sure that students are having access to content that is aligning with their aspirations or what they are interested in, as opposed to it being just getting through a math class, if you will, which makes me so sad, and I'm sure you too, because like we love math and the joy and wonder of mathematics. We want stronger relevance for students. And then the last thing I really want to leave it with is this whole conversation about promoting strong networking and community opportunities. We really talked a lot about the assets of and how do we highlight what students know and what students bring to the table. I think that you are on this amazing journey. And so really thinking about how you together are using the importance of this time and this work to not only start implementing co-requisites more frequently, but also like, how are you thinking about that over the next 5 years or the next 10 years? How are you going to continue to work together to be like, what's working and what's like next level? Because no matter where you are, we always are wanting to do better, right? Like, we are not talking about straight roads. It is not this one like linear way of getting through mathematics, but it's like, how do we have this experience and how do we take this talent and how do we use this information to complete a whole picture that has us being our better selves. I'm Jolie Honey, and I wish I had been on Zoom with you today, but I also hope that you have enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate you going through this with me being recorded. Thank you.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you guys so much for attending today's session. We have a couple of announcements from Dr. Jennifer Bonzraki. Would you like to go ahead and announce what you are looking for?
I think John has a question. John, if
Oh,
it's about
sorry.
the presentation, do we want to do that first and then I'll do the wrap up, if that's okay?
Do after the wrap up because it's tangential. So
Oh, no, I get the end. I get the last word. So now
Okay.
would be a good time. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was going to suggest is, so Dr. Honey mentioned the co-requisite summit and the idea of building strong networking. I actually just emailed you a little bit ago, Dr. Bondarecki, and something that I'd like to just share for everybody here. I think it would be really important for us to get together and actually have the conversations that were just, we were unable to do in the recording. So an idea that I had, and I called my AVP and she said, yes, it's a great idea, is that maybe we could have the 6 Regents universities to host over the next 3 years, maybe once a semester. We get math faculty to come in, get together, talk about what's happening, what we're trying, what's not working, and so on, just like we heard. And so we have that opportunity, and Wichita State is volunteering to host it first, whatever this looks like. So if we can get the help of KBOR to have, instead of a top down, but instead of a bottom up, getting all of us together to chat, that would be wonderful. I need all the help you can get because I'm just a math teacher, but I want to see this vision happen. So
Thanks, John. We
Thank you.
love the embracing of the idea of communities of practice, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. And I certainly know from being a faculty member myself how we can thrive in those environments. And now I'll give that, and I certainly can't commit KBOR to anything, right? My pay grade isn't that high, but I'll be sure to pass along your email and that idea to the powers that be. And I know that they'll communicate with the CAOs. Of course, without KBOR, you guys are welcome to organize things as disciplined faculty members too, right? So please don't think that you have to wait on the final say. There's always things that you guys can do with your colleagues without us. But thanks for thinking to include us as well. Okay, so a few closing comments, and I promise I'll do it in 2 minutes because it's a Friday afternoon. As you guys know, this does complete the professional development training series. The recordings up until today are all posted online, so you can continue to use those throughout the academic year. Just want to take a moment to thank Whitney and Connie for volunteering their time to co-lead these. This was certainly volunteer work that they were doing on top of their normal jobs. So thank you guys so much for your leadership and your support. We really all appreciate it. For those of you on the call, I just want to share a few other announcements related to Math Pathways in general. One, your chief academic officers heard a report at the December board meeting, just summarizing that right now. KBOR is metaphorically passing the baton to campuses, right? As Brandon highlighted earlier today, even though there's policy telling us, providing instructions on when we'll launch and the ways we might launch with co-requisite supports, the designing of the courses, the content, the things like that. We want to empower the faculty to work on. And so now we're passing the baton to give faculty the time to do that. Other things will still continue that support Math Pathways over the next few months, though. We have the CCA event. I hope that many of you will be able to attend that. If not, be sure to talk to those on your campus who are attending. We did have to limit attendance to 6 individuals for each institution, and we have already surpassed that. And I think we're kind of up to probably the fire code in the room, because we've had such a wonderful response to people wanting to attend. In addition to the CCA event, we also have an EIT meeting this spring, just concluding our work with the Executive Implementation Committee for this academic year. We have 3 Math Pathways Task Force meetings coming up. So if there are things that you're still interested in or want additional topics to be considered, the members of the task force are listed on our website. Always feel free to reach out to them, as well as Whitney, because Whitney helps lead that task force as well, and myself. We'll be interested in hearing any thoughts that you have for the task force to consider. And then to John's point about what do ongoing touch points look like, even not, we're not talking about the spring semester, what does it look like for the system as we move forward? Because beyond even helping faculty develop pedagogy, we want to be sure that we're also continuing to work with advisors, that we're partnering with the K-12 schools and districts. So making sure that we're really taking that holistic approach to Math Pathways implementation. And so just really want to encourage you through your own institutions to remain involved with your chain of command. Sam and I are in frequent conversations with your CAOs. And so we encourage you to consider using that chain of command and sharing your ideas with them. We even frequently give them the opportunity through surveys to provide us additional feedback on different aspects of Math Pathways implementation. And so we'll continue to be in that dialogue with them. Oh, shoot, it's 4:01. I was a minute over. I apologize. Thanks so much to everyone. Have a great weekend.